So, I mean, the practice of all three of you, and you're working with living systems and computational systems in very diverse ways. Intentions and methods vary. How clear is the line between the sort of biological and the digital, between the natural and the artificial for you? Is it a very grey area, or is it a very clear line differentiating between the two?
Want to go first?
I can go first. It has been very clear up to now for me. On the one hand, there was the digital, and the other hand, there was the analog. And particularly in music, we have a clear distinction between the analog and the digital worlds, the acoustic instrument and the digital instrument. So that division has been quite clear to me until very recently. Now I'm working with those, this kind of organism, trying to harness it to perform things that are deemed to be digital. But I'm realizing that it's a very gray area, especially when you begin to think about new kinds of computational theories like quantum computing and biocomputing, DNA computing. So all these things now become very fluid, and I still needed to think more about it. But it's clear to me that the way the digital world is developing, there is going to be a massive interaction with the non-digital. And the more interaction there is, the less clear the distinction will be. That's how I see it. But I think to answer it, it's gray. It's not one and zero. It's not black and white.
No. I was asking about, because all three of you are working with the bio and digital interfaces, and I was asking how clear the territory was between the artificial and the natural, the biological and the computational, whether it was a very grey area. So I don't know if, Veronica, you want to respond?
Well, I think it's exactly that kind of problem. Biodigitality is a term that has been thrown around, I'd say quite carelessly almost, because I think a lot of people would consider even wearing a pacemaker as some form of biodigitality. And I think that is exactly the kind of problem, the quantity and almost the quality of the relationship between biological matter, biological entity, and digitality or digital. That is sort of how they relate to one another and what kind of relations they form. That has to be kind of more clarified, because there's different forms of biodigitality already around. There's sort of something that has kind of like, there's almost a different kind of hierarchy in some of these modulations. You have like digital kind of digital reading of biology. You have sort of digitality that's interpreted by visually observing biological organisms or like entities. You have mixed forms, and then you have also, for example, the thing I'm interested in is a sort of minimizing the friction, or like down to like a very specific, like kind of a specific point, minimizing that or like equalizing, balancing that connection between biological matter and digital readability. Sort of material-induced digitality is what I'm interested in, not a digitality that is somehow engrafted on top of a material to then only read what it can read. Mm-hmm. Because I think that's the problem I think having with current biodigitality is it's incredibly fragmented possibilities of digital media, with regards to the messiness, complexity of biological matter and medium. So there's a sort of unhinged relationship here, which I'm not quite happy with, which is also I'm trying to do, trying to partly resolve in my research at the moment.
Would either of you like to respond to that or add?
Might be interesting because I'm actually interested in this, what I mentioned, this techno-ecologies. With my work with Ernst in collaboration, I've learned that there are things that are similar in the ways, or I like to see the way technology works in a decentralized way and in uncontrolled manner. That's what I like. And for me, there is a point where nature and the things we create artificially as human beings that aid our lifestyles, or to become more social, or to optimize our everyday, it's about control. Either way you want to call it or shape it or mask it, it's all about control. And technology, we control technology. We created it and we like to control it. Nature, you cannot control nature. We tried and we keep trying. You know, there is, for me, that's what I like. The way things just unravel without human beings. That's what I love. The way ants just comes out of crevices, the way insects just manage to keep. And actually, I think even though we created technology, or we created this digitality, or want to see this aesthetics around everything that we surrounds us nowadays in these times, I think for me personally, I like to see more the similarities in what happens with everything that we create. Just we let it just be and unfold. And what if some other living being takes over it?
So what would the others like to say about where control stops, or if you are relinquishing control? Because if you're working with the living systems, yes, you may be able to predict behaviours and responses to conditions, but you cannot control. I mean, is that an attractive element, or is that a kind of byproduct that you have to manage?
For my work, I want to be able to control the organism that I'm working with. But is to be able to control it, to be uncontrolled, if you see what I mean. I want to explore its non-linearity, its non-predictability, but in order to explore that in a way that I can understand what's going on, I have to be able to control it. I have to be able to know what I'm doing, and then let the bioorganism, biocomputer, whatever you want to call it, let that thing that I'm working with to interact with me. But I have this thirst. I need to understand what's going on. Even if I don't fully understand, if I just have an illusion that I'm understanding it. But that is what I consider control. It's a way to study. And otherwise, there would not be much point for me to develop that kind of research, because I want to develop it further. And I want to create this machine that I can interact with. I'm interested in AI not to replace human intelligence or replace jobs and things like that. I'm interested in developing these intelligent machines that can be interactive with me and help me to be more creative. But I need to understand how these machines work. And so that's why control is important.
Thank you. Veronica, do you want to add something about control?
Yes. So yeah, that is, I have a little bit of a different perspective on that, because I think, of course, it is a very desirable sort of thing to think, oh, I could control this organism in order for me to kind of make it behave in certain ways. But I personally think that might be a little bit of a reductive perspective, if I may say, because what you kind of potentially strip away here is a possibility of the yet to you unknown. And it might be worth maybe considering that actually more as a positive thing rather than trying to eradicate that, because maybe there is something emerging in here. But that's just a comment about the approach that I kind of find quite interesting about silk processing in particular is it's a protein. It's very difficult to handle. It responds to humidity in the air, temperature changes, temperature drops, air pressure. If somebody has a quick sneeze in the room, it can spoil the whole batch. But that in itself is not an undesirable quality. The opposite is the case, that controlling these very, very subtle and very small factors constitutes the material programming. So here you're not kind of enforcing any kind of chemical processes or mechanical influences onto the material. You are working very carefully with it in the right kind of conditions, but you'll have to respect the specific material quality. So that's why it's so difficult to scale it up for body interfaces, which is why I kind of saw this essentially as a form of craft, because it requires a certain connoisseurship of the material and its origin. So let's say the Bombyx mori silk from Japan behaves very different than the one from Cambodia. The one from India behaves different to the one that may have grown, like has grown in the UK. So it's quite an interesting one. So instead of seeing this as a limitation or an uncontrollability, that might be a sort of rich diversity that enables other options. This might be a way of looking at it.
Okay. This will be my last question before I open it up, and it's a kind of two-part thing. We're talking about working with living systems, and I'd like you to respond to the ethical considerations. And so are there moral, legal, ethical, social implications in what you do and how you work with a living system? And how do you define your relationship with that living system? Is it a collaboration? Is it co-creation? Is it exploitation or benevolent slavery? So an ethical and relationship.
I just gonna start saying which it will end. Or it will start with another question for you guys, because I was interested in. I pretty know. I'm very sure, and everyone that studies or work with ants before know that they are extremely social. That's why there's this term. If you don't know, ants are like termites or bees, eusocial, not even social. They're above us. So I was wondering. So being that connection for me, it's very critical, and that's an interesting question that I cannot answer very clearly, because I have my frustrations with them as well when I keep them. Like just, language is very difficult. You want to explain to other human beings what you're doing, and not only what you are interested in, fascination, of course, you start loving, they know that I love them, but there's a point where, like I mentioned before, chaos just appears, Now, probably, hopefully, when I come back, they're not running around my studio, because that happens, And I like it, but then when I'm there, I don't like it, because I have to, collect them all, and sometimes some of them go out to die outside, like elephants do as well. They just retrieve them. There's the natural behavior. They don't die inside. They want some of them, not all of them. So the question coming to being like silkworms and Plasmodium. Living beings. How social do you see your subjects, the subjects you try to collaborate with? Because there's no way around. They're very social. They're just way too social. And of course, I'm keen and I try my best. But like I said before, I like that no matter what I do, and that also connects with the idea of purpose, there is nothing that you can, unless you just, by observing ants, you create this model and you admire them. But there's no natural resource that the ants produce, like bees or like silk, that we humans can exploit from them. But you need to learn how to treat them. In order to learn how to treat them, you need to learn the different species of ants that have managed to adapt to different. So it's impossible, because you need to spend a whole lifetime in order to learn what they need. It's not about just, it's an ant, it's sugar, or it's a leafcutter ant, it's just this leaf. No, you need to learn, and that's...
Or you just modify them to like what you can give them.
Genetically, you mean?
Yeah, well, that's been done with silkworms, yeah.
Yeah, but it's not done before yet. I mean, it's not done now. So there is no thing that the ants, and that's one of the resiliency that I like to highlight with the work I do, because it's difficult to keep ants. It's very extremely difficult, and by being difficult, you hit these walls where you want to be let's say, you want to provide them with the necessary and you don't want to hurt them. But of course, we are very stupid human beings, mammals, and they're very small and delicate. So just by that, you need to, and then when they're just so huge colonies of 5 years or 8 years old, then you want to be gentle with one that escape, and then there's, millions that escape, you cannot do it, So there is this kind of treatment manually that you have to, there's a line where you cannot be, if you want to control them, ants are not the subjects you want to work with, definitely.
Yeah, I think that's the thing, isn't it? I mean, the slime mode is nothing compared to an ant or to a silkworm. It's just a cell. And to put it bluntly, I'm exploiting it to achieve something that I want to build. Of course, that's my approach to it, and it's that there is nothing ethical about it. I think. I mean, it's just a very low level organism in evolutionary terms. That there is nothing ethical about it.
Do you think it's exploitation?
I think so.
Or is it because there's no other way for us humans to see that?
I mean, we've got a little slime in the lab. There is. Of course, I build a rapport with it because I'm cultivating it. I'm trying to harness it. But there is not such a thing like keeping it alive for too long because it will die anyway. You have a little sample that if you leave it unattended, it will just disappear. So it's different from working with an insect. That's a much higher level. It's an animal, whereas the slime mold I'm working with is not even an animal. So I think the ethical issue may arise later on, depending on what you develop with it. So if there is a new kind of machine, a new kind of processor that will be developed later, then the ethical issue you will raise. But at this level I'm working at the moment, I don't think there is anything really.
So we're talking about hierarchies and status and value.
I think so.
From our perspective.
I think so.
I'm going to pause and just see who has questions. How many questions do we have, or comments? None. You're all dumbfounded. Oh no, we have one.
Stupid questions are always good. How do you get silkworms if the adults can't reproduce? Sorry. How do you get silkworms if the adults can't reproduce?
Well, you can reproduce because there are, for example, 2 different strands of silkworms available, like several other strands available. So you need to distinguish, for example, in the silkworms that are for production and the ones that are for breeding. So there's 2 different. Even the sort of whole industry around silk production has been fragmented and substructured into industrial supply chain. So you have breeders who only kind of focus on the breeding and the desired qualities of the animals, and they would focus on kind of refreshing the kind of lines of silkworms and bringing them together, and then deliver the eggs to the silkworm factories. How I get them, I have a sort of silkworm breeder here in London who I never met in several years, and I very much doubt he has a black business in his basement. And he always sends them to me via post, the eggs. So I don't know where he creates them. Hello, Thomas, if you hear me. I wanted to meet him, but he refuses to meet me. So I think the only thing I keep hearing from Thomas over the years is, oh, we're moving, we're kind of growing. Like now it was an office, and then all of a sudden he talked about a large farm he rents in Essex. And all of a sudden he's like, I kind of keep hearing only on the side that the business is growing for some reason.
Maybe he's hearing the other.
I don't know. So, but can I say something about the ethical issues quickly? What I found interesting is that the scientists themselves, or the people who work with silkworms, don't necessarily have that much regard for the animal itself, which is understandable because you're focusing on certain aspects, working, engineering the material, and so on. I understand that. It sometimes comes with the profession. Doctors are also rather sort of neutral when they kind of, or surgeon who deals with this patient. So that's how I kind of see a similar relationship. So I also dissected silkworms, for example, but we would put them on ice before, so just to make sure they're not feeling anything. However, they're not regarded to have pain receptors, so you don't need any kind of go through an ethical committee to actually do experiments with them, because they have roughly, I was told, the pain receptors of a fruit fly. Almost non-existing. However, when I observe them and when I keep them, I know that they are very sort of receptive to temperature changes. When I lift the lid of the container, they're lifting their heads because they know there's going to be food. So it's not entirely. I cannot help myself to kind of still see the wild-living animal even in that highly modified creature. But what I'm kind of looking at, because the animal cannot be changed anymore itself, is I'm interested in the impact of biomaterials, since the outcomes of that animal product are going to hit in probably larger scale the material world. So I see it as a justifiable sacrifice, perhaps. When silk materials will probably enter also the consumer electronics market and so on, in comparison, for example, to a plastic bag, where you sacrifice a lot of animals in like far later down the chain, in a sort of more intangible and manner. Whereas when here you would kind of have the sacrifice in the very beginning, and it is very obvious, and you can count the sacrifices. I mean, it's a difficult one, but
it's a balance. That's fine.
I mean, I'm not saying there's a right and wrong in here, but it's a tricky one.
Okay, we're nearly out of time, but I think is that a hand or a scratch? Okay, so we'll take two questions. If we take both questions and then we'll let them respond.
I'm just curious there's political parties for animals in certain countries, there's laws about how animals can be used in experiments, and is there any such thing in art? For instance, your work with ants. Do your ants have workers' rights? Are your ants in any way protected from potential, I'm sure you treat them very, very kindly and very, very well, and you feed them well. I'm just, and the same with your slime mold and your slime mold. I mean, are you under the radar still as artists working with?
No.
Okay, sorry, that's the question you got.
Okay, hold that question, and we'll take the other question, and then you can respond.
Although, yeah, just in Detroit, they know now that I work with us because I'm introduced when I went there.
Hi. I was interested in the sort of fact that technology all seems as if it's sort of mimicking nature, and at the moment technology is a very primitive form of that. We build sensors, they're no different to our eyes or sort of our tongue. And it seems now that the trend is sort of coming full circle, and we're almost trying to create, well, as you said, DNA computers, which is closer to nature. So I guess I'm trying to ask, what are we just getting more efficient at reproducing what nature is with this technology, and are we just trying to control nature in a sense, and that is the ultimate technology? So I'm trying to.
It's a very interesting question, and I've been asking that myself about as well. What's going on? From a very narrow perspective, from my little world of computing and AI and so on, it seems to me that what we have been doing for many, many, many years is to make models inspired by nature. And these models became increasingly more informed by nature rather than inspired, because the more we understand, the more that understanding is used to build the models. And I think we are reaching a stage now where instead of actually making the models, use the real thing. And I think that is where things will begin to get a little bit this science is going to develop very, very quickly. And we as society and the political, the controllers of ethics and so on are going to have a lot of difficulties to catch up and to make the regulations. So things are going to get a little bit strange, I think. But I think we are moving now from this phase of inspired by to actually tap into the real things that we model. And that, that goes back to control and so on and so on. That's the way I see it at the moment. But it is an interesting way of looking at it. It's an interesting thing to ask ourselves.
May I say something? I think that I really like what you said, because I believe that it's just for the idea of, and probably this encompasses the whole context why we're here, interspecies communication, collaboration, relationship, interspecies, whatever you want to call it, but it's about not communicating, trying to learn how to establish a relationship with another living being that could be helpful for us, but then the question arises, how can we give it back to them? And that's why I want to figure out how, if I keep ants which are not native from here, how can I, if I strive myself to keep them alive, to provide and to simulate this nature that doesn't really exist in this artificial environment, you guys do the same with the specimens you're working with. But then the question is this purpose really, truly what they need? Is it really necessary to do it, or do they feel bad? Are they empathetic to you? But for me, it's all about it. Even if you manage to create new technology or models, it's not about objective manipulation, but rather this subjective manipulation, trying to understand what they need and how can collaborate together. You give me something, I give it back.
Of course, it's our interest to keep our resources alive. Otherwise, we will die as well. So we have to exploit.
Some political leaders that.
Yeah. We have to exploit, but intelligently. Because if you exploit and destroy, then that's gone.
Can I say something about the question? So you said, if to kind of recap quickly, to kind of make sure I understood the question, right? So you said basically, is there an attempt to kind of go full circle to just better imitate nature through technology? Is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay. So I think there's a justified question, definitely, and I think I've seen a lot of that when it comes particularly to biodigital interfacing, body interfacing. So a lot of imitation, biomimicry, biomimetics, and so on. But I think particularly what's unusual, for example, about silken body interfaces is that there is no predecessor in a way. This is an animal product that can enter the body and therefore creates a sort of new entity within the body. And what it also can do, I think, it can create or amplify invisible processes within the body that would usually, I would say, escape our senses. So let's say you have a silken biosensor, a film that could be wrapped around your liver after liver surgery, kind of to monitor the healing process. Let's say you had a nice little liver cirrhosis and a third of your liver had to kind of be taken out. That film would be wrapped around your liver, you would be stitched up again, and during the healing process, that silken film would biodegrade. That biodegrading would therefore be the computing, would react with the bodily tissues and with the liquids in the body, and report that in digital terms, let's say, to an external receiver. Can be a smartphone, mustn't be, can be a screen, can be the doctor, so on and so on. But what it could do potentially is it could give clues of what's happening inside the body without having to open up the person again. From a pragmatic perspective, this is hugely interesting, of course. But what it also may open up to is something more poetic in the future, might be some sort of body interfaces for unknown communication processes we kind of don't consider yet. Brain interfacing, where it works really well with silken films. I'm not necessarily saying that this is just a good thing. Hence is why I'm interested in opening up that discourse, because I think it's a number too big.
I think we're going to have to leave it there because we're over time, and we may have lots of questions. We might have places to go and dinner to get. I think that let's just thank our three speakers, Veronica, Eduardo, and Kuai.